On the 25th of May, in the height of the coronavirus pandemic, George Floyd, an African-American man, was murdered by a white police officer after he knelt on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. This subsequently sparked outrage and protests not only all over the USA, but all over the world. They were fighting against the disproportionate acts of police brutality against black people.
Enough is enough!
And in over 2,000 cities in 60 countries, we saw the full support of what we now know as the Black Lives Matter BLM movement. It's estimated that between 15 and 26 million people participated in the movement in the United States alone. So while this movement in 2020 really propelled Black Lives Matter back into the public limelight, it actually started way back in 2013 when a man named George Zimmerman was acquitted after he shot to death an American teen, Trayvon Martin.
We, the jury, found George Zimmerman not guilty.
And since then, Black Lives Matter have platformed a number of other high-profile murders, including Reka Boyd in 2012 and Eric Garner and Michael Brown, both in 2014. It's even inspired a movie as well called The Hate U Give that came out in 2018. So what is Black Lives Matter? Well, it refers to a number of different things, which has sort of led to blurring the understanding of what the movement is. So we may refer to the Twitter hashtag, which has been trending many times. Black Lives Matter can also refer to the sort of decentralized political movement without a leader, or it can refer to various official groups, the largest one we know, the Black Lives Matter Network Foundation, who raise money to fight for their cause. Nonetheless, Black Lives Matter as a movement is seemingly there to highlight racism, discrimination experienced by black people, particularly in America, and ultimately promote anti-racism to reach a point in society where there is more equality between black, white, and all races. It appears to be a very noble and much needed cause, right? But is BLM all we thought it was? Well, it seems like, particularly lately, people are becoming disillusioned to Black Lives Matter after a number of things have come to light. So I found myself asking, what is BLM even fighting for? Is the original cause of police brutality even valid? And does what's happened with Black Lives Matter reflect a global problem we have in the ability to think critically? And ultimately, is leftist and woke ideology eating its own? So hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jack. I'm very glad to have you back here with me, or if you're new, welcome. Just a quick one, I have recently joined Instagram, so please follow me on there. And if you do enjoy my content, please make sure you subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment down below, like the video, share some love, and let me know what you think. What can I do better? What would you like to see next? I'm very interested in everything you have to say. What I'd like to promote here today is to really do your own research when it comes to these big topics and big political movements. You know, if someone tells you about something and says, this is what it's for, this is what people think, you should always be questioning that. You should say, okay, got you. And then if you really want to continue talking about that and spreading it, you should be doing your own research, you know? You can agree or disagree, there's different opinions out there, but here we go. Just last year in 2023, The Guardian recorded that there was a record number of killings by police in the US. Like we've seen before, this disproportionately has affected African Americans, killing at a rate of 3 times higher than whites. And when you look at the NAACP website, they definitely endorse this. So some of the statistics they have are 84% of black adults say white people are treated better. 87% of black people also believe that the criminal justice system is more unjust towards them than it is for white people. And while there are more white people killed as a number, they only account for 41% of shootings when white people actually make up 60% of the population. But then we see with black people, who represent about 13.4% of the population, they actually account for 22% of shootings. So this seems to suggest there is a disparity there. And of course, Black Lives Matter agrees. So they say 95% of America's major city police departments kill black people at a higher rate than white people. Another study I found in which how are black people actually treated by police, 3.5% of respondents said that force was threatened or used, compared to 1.5% of white people. And actually 2.8% of black people said excessive force was used, and this was compared to only 1% of white people. So looking at all this, there's no reason to assume it's wrong, right? It seems like a very legitimate cause, and Black Lives Matter is fighting for something that very much needs to be addressed. And the problem is, most people will stop here. They'll see it on Instagram, they'll see it on Twitter, and then out they go marching for the protests. Because why would they question it? If someone gives them this information, then of course, I need to fight for that. I need to support it.
I feel guilty that I've not done anything vocally to help the people who are oppressed, and they've been oppressed for so long.
And when we look at 2019, so before the pandemic, before George Floyd, we see that 999 people were shot by police in the USA, and 25% of these were Black. So racism is a huge problem in the police, right? Maybe not. The issue is that disparity doesn't always equate to racism. And assuming that this is just because of racism is where a lot of people fall short. So what's the full story? Is this because of racism? It actually seems not, or at the very least, it's impossible to prove. When we compare the percentage of police shootings to the percentage of the population, this kind of initially seems logical, right? Well, it actually doesn't make any sense to do it that way, because what we should be looking at is the percentage of police encounters and how many did these result in a fatality. So we see that from the same year, 2019, Black people are actually far more likely to be arrested to begin with. There were 6.8 million arrests. Now, 1.8 of those were Black Americans, 26.6%, which, when we compare it to the population, is over double. And when we look at the most violent crimes in particular, the stats do not look great. So over 50% of Black people are responsible for manslaughters, 26.7% rape, over 50% robbery. And when we think about these acts are normally committed by young men, well, young Black men only represent about 2.8% of the whole population. Something else we don't look at often is white on Black crime and Black on white crime. When we look at single offender, single victim homicides, for every white victim, 17% of the perpetrators are Black. However, when we look at Black victims, 8.5% of the perpetrators were white. So we see actually double the amount of Black people killing white people than the other way around. And then Black on Black homicides represents 88.6%. So the question is, where is Black Lives Matter talking about Black on Black crime, Black on white crime, and how we can address these situations to save more lives and keep more people out of trouble, reform people? But no, they're not interested in that. They're only interested in the disparities by white people over Black people. So one argument here is, okay, so you can base it on arrests, but arrests are one thing. What we really should be looking at is how many encounters does the police have with the whole population in comparison to these shootings. So while we can't know this for sure, it's estimated that about 375 million police encounters occur across the USA per year. Now with 2019, when we look at the fatalities, this actually represents 0.00027% of all police encounters in which a fatality occurs. This percentage is not telling us that police in America are on some rampage to kill lots of people. Certainly not to mistrust most of the police, if any. So does the police really have a systemic racism problem? Well, you can argue that more encounters occur by the police because they're looking for them. They're looking for more Black people to encounter. But you can also claim that because crime occurs more often, a lot more often in the Black community, then police are going to be more hypervigilant around these areas, and there will be more encounters as a result. So this is highly debatable. You can see studies that actually say the opposite. This one says that Black people are 3.5 times more likely to be killed unarmed than white, even after factoring in local crime. The question is, can we always equate this to racism? And racism is obviously a subjective, internal motivation, impossible to prove unless someone outright admits it. And while they may be more likely to be harmed when they're unarmed, this doesn't account for all the other factors. Did they cooperate with the police? Were they threatening? Was there resistance? How many people were involved? Did they try to escape? And what was the severity of the crime? And when we look at all these confounding factors, it's impossible to say this is because of racism. And actually, it's a very simplistic way to look at things. It's black and white thinking. And we all know that these days it is seemingly so much easier to look at things that way because we don't have to think. We think that everyone is good and bad. And then we can go and post things on our story, go out, rally a bit, virtue signal, and then that leaves us as really good people, right? And some studies actually show that police are more hesitant to shoot Black people because of the fear that people will assume the motives were always by racism. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there are lots of cases in which murders happen because of racism, but does it represent a wider systemic issue across the whole country? And does it warrant such a big movement as Black Lives Matter did? At best, it's clear that actually no disparity exists motivated by racism. And at the very least, there is no consensus, despite the whole world being outraged by these racist white police. And looking back on those NAACP statistics, surveys are entirely opinion, right? Black people saying that they weren't treated as well, that excessive force was used. This is entirely an opinion. If we are teaching the Black community to fear police, that police are inherently racist, police are out to get them, then we are actually creating a culture of people that are going to be more aggressive, more resistant, more hostile. And then this can result in more force and being treated differently. If you're treating the police badly, then you're going to claim, well, they treated me badly. People say that Black people are sent to prison for longer for committing the same crime as white people. So again, most people will stop there. But what about the other factors? Were they a repeat offender? Were they cooperative with the police? Did they show any remorse? Were there others involved? Are they of good character? These are things that people just don't want to bother think of. And actually, police officers are 18.5% more likely to be killed by Black people than white people. And where is the movement on that? So is Black Lives Matter creating a younger generation to hate and fear the police, and police who fear to do their job correctly? So you can get this far and you can say, hang on a second, if crime is higher in the Black community, and we all know that crime is far more likely to occur in impoverished, disadvantaged areas, then this still represents a problem of systemic racism. So in the US, 17.6% of Black people are below the poverty rate, while 8.6% of white people, so that is about double. And we see higher crime rates from a number of different factors in these areas. So educational inequalities, neighborhood effects, parenting, access to credit, rate of incarceration, and so on. And does this represent a wider systemic problem? Well, again, not necessarily. While the effects from white oppression on Black America have definitely trickled down to what we see today, even though they've become more and more diluted, this is only one confounding factor. Going way back to the Jim Crow law era, which enforced segregation between the 1940s and 60s, Black unemployment rates, murder rates, infection of venereal diseases, teen pregnancies were actually on a steep decline. So this was even in spite of blatant racial policies and obviously provable discrimination. However, when Lyndon P. Johnson came into president in the 60s, he had this view of what he called the Great Society, and this was aiming to expand civil rights, access to education, healthcare, trying to rid the USA of inequality between minority groups and the rest.
Not only toward the rich society and the powerful society, but upward to the Great Society.
So he launched something we know as the War on Poverty to create better living conditions for low-income Americans and ergo better living conditions for Black Americans.
An end to poverty and racial injustice.
Between 1965 and 1968, spending to help poor people doubled from $1 billion to $2 billion. So this was massive. And one part of this in particular was the welfare state, which granted single mothers more benefit and support than if they were with a partner raising the baby together. And the more babies this person had, the more benefits she would get. So before 1960, remember, racist times, extremely racist times, 2/3 of Black Americans, Black children, were living with both biological parents, right? But by 1995, 1/3 of Black kids were living with both parents. And today, 85% of Black children in poverty have 0 fathers present. So 85%, that is huge. But why is this so significant? Well, one parent household is significantly worse off statistically, regardless of a person's race or background. The links are clear. Without a father figure, without 2 parents, you have much higher chance of criminal activity, going to prison, chronic illness, to not move up the social mobility ladder, to have poor education, low income, the list goes on. And then this becomes a vicious circle. And in the US, the odds of Black young adults getting a college degree are almost 70% higher when they're raised by two parents. In single parent homes, they are 1.8 times more likely to have spent time in prison or jail in their 20s. And in particular, the drug epidemic in the US sent disproportionate numbers of Black men to prison because of this, crushed job opportunities for them, and women don't want to marry men who can't provide for their families. And what we've seen is these welfare state laws have actually created a financial incentive to raise kids on their own, and also motivated no responsibility or accountability for fathers. In the past, if you knock someone up, then the solution was, okay, we're going to have to stay together. Most of them would say we're going to have to get married, raise the kids together. But at the very least, they should be aiming to raise the kids together, because that child has so many more opportunities with two parents, two incomes. The benefits are immeasurable. And then another way the US has tried to solve the disparities between white and Black people is in
Affirmative Action.
So this is when we saw Black students being accepted into university for less success on criteria and scores than their white counterparts.
So in the 80s, they began considering race in their admissions decisions. It worked. By the 90s, they would chart students on a social diversity index. If you were low income and a minority and had moderate grades and test scores, you were in. If you were high income and white, you needed higher scores to get in.
The Harvard class of 2019, these are the kids who will be graduating next June. The average SAT score for Black students was 2149, white students 2218, Asian students 2300. Well, now that must be reasonable because it's taking place at Harvard, the seat of reason.
Well, that wasn't quite how I described it when I was there.
I think for me, when I see this, it already makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. Is this how we solve inequalities? By giving certain minority groups more opportunities, for having less favorable criteria, and choosing to actually discriminate towards white people, and in this case, Asian people as well. So actually, this seems to harm everyone, because we see certain people being accepted into Ivy League universities, of which they probably would have still got into lots of other good universities, but they're with a group of people in which they can't keep up. And they leave university feeling inadequate. It's not a good experience for them or their classmates. And also, Asian people have actually been disproportionately affected by this. So we see discrimination going towards them. And they've also experienced discrimination in the past. Even across all corporate industries, they now have massive DEI programs where they have quotas, where they need to hire minority groups. And I even wonder myself if I've got certain jobs because of the fact I'm gay, even though I'm so smart. So if anything, the ability to move from lower class to middle class seems to be easier in America for Black people. They have more opportunities for that social mobility than if you were a white person from poverty. After all, think about it. If you're a white person from poverty, one parent, your parent was a drug addict, you've had a really, really difficult life, no one's offering you special accommodations for jobs or getting into university. And to me, that just doesn't make sense. We can't resolve one disparity by disparaging another group. Another effort to solve inequalities is
Critical race theory,
which is being taught widely across campuses. The premise is that white people always carry an inherent sense of privilege solely from the reason of being white. And it affects everyone, no matter how successful you are. It affects all Black people.
We don't get that 3 meals a day. Like when I feel just like hungry, like I'm so like sad and all droopy, and then I'll feel like weak.
I am a young Black rich. If that don't let you know that America understands Black matter these days.
We look at microaggressions, in which even the smallest thing is evidence of your racism.
Can you please not talk about when I switch up my hair? I know, but like as a Black person, to me, it feels like a microaggression.
And not just the fact that you don't know much about their culture, or you're interested in their hair, or you want to wear something because it's inspiring to wear.
Kardashians fetishize Black women's features and adopt their aesthetic without actually having to live the Black experience. They've been called out for cultural appropriation multiple times, yet choose to hide behind the fact that they have relationships and children with Black men rather than addressing the problem at hand. Having kids with Black people doesn't automatically shield you from being culturally insensitive.
But all of these ideas tell us that Our actions, our thoughts are all motivated by racism. And what we see is actually many white liberals adopting this ideology because it makes them feel good. They want to virtue signal. It's their way of thinking they're giving back to Black people and kind of ridding themselves of this white guilt.
We know he's God and he no longer can be here. You know, I never can like we're not rioting God. We're not shaming anybody, God.
Which they don't even need to feel because they weren't involved in all the slavery that happened a long time ago. But anyway, it has led us to treating Black people like children. And the fact is, many Black people disagree with this. So if you're in one of these conversations with a white person and they say, how can you say this? You shouldn't be talking about this. Say, well, what if I told you that many Black people disagree with what you're saying?
And that truth is that white people have nothing to do with our problems now. The Black community is our biggest problem.
Are you saying that because someone's Black, they all need to think the same thing and they need to find all these microaggressions offensive? Well, that actually seems
pretty racist to me.
This constant savior bias is not good for the younger generation. Children are born without racial bias. Race is arbitrary. There's nothing biological that's going to motivate them to see another race as lower than them. And instead of teaching them to view people as individuals, we are teaching them critical race theory, which only creates more segregation, more questioning, more fear, and alienation between the races. It's not helpful. And what it's doing for Black people is terrible. It is teaching people to not have accountability, to not be empowered, to feel anger and aggressive towards society. They can blame society and white people for their shortcomings. It can demotivate people because they ultimately feel that the world is out to get them and that life will always be harder for them than other people. This can lead to poor mental health.
I asked my mom if I could be dropped off here. Her response was, is it safe? If you want to talk about those protecting me, I look to those who are standing right now because my trust isn't in them. I don't trust any of you. I don't trust any of the police officers because you have shown time and time again that we cannot trust you.
The effects are so damaging, and it's all because of this belief. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell people you are oppressed, you are a victim, life will be harder for you, then of course it will, because they'll view everything through this lens.
It's a shame that our fathers and mothers are killed and we can't even see them anymore.
And if you're someone who thinks that right-wing people are racist, sure, there might be arguments for that. However, we can see that leftist policies and ideology are actually contributing to racial inequalities rather than solving it. So if you're a leftist,
think about that.
So while trying to address all of these issues of which there is little proof for, what's been the impact of Black Lives Matter? So obviously we've seen all the protests, many of which have been peaceful, fine with that, but many of them have also not. And in 2020, just by June, we saw a 1 to 2 billion damage to property. And many of this occurred in Black neighborhoods with Black-owned businesses. So it's directly damaging their own cause. And this was the highest record of damage in American history. That does not seem like it should be going hand in hand with the movement, right? There were actually 25 deaths linked to the riots in the USA. And while it all started because of one death of George Floyd, now there's 25 people. So that doesn't seem right either. Black Lives Matter has called for the defunding of the police. People think the police are inherently racist, they're useless, we can't trust them, therefore you need to take away their funding and put it into other sources. And the thing about it is, a lot of these things are driven by middle-class people and middle-class white people. And I think it's quite similar to when we see middle-class women, white women who want to be super liberal, they can be Black, they can be any race, but they are unquestionably advocating for trans women and trans rights and trans women to have access to spaces, sports, prisons, shelters, but they have not had to run away to a women's shelter. They don't know what the experience is like of fearing your life because of a man, having no money, having to flee and go to a women's shelter, or being in prison because of hardships in your life and fearing being raped. They don't have to experience that. So it's easier for them to say, oh, well, this is a noble cause. They're not talking to the people who this actually affects. And it's the same thing with Black Lives Matter. It's actually having damaging effects on lower income Black Americans. So for example, Oakland, California, Defund the Police, they cut 50% of the budget, more than 150 million per year. And then in 2020, we saw 107 murders compared to 75 in 2019. New York City, they cut $1 billion in police funding. We saw a 35% rise in robberies and rapes, 30% rise in shootings. Austin, Texas saw the highest number of homicides in 20 years. So we defund the police say bye-bye. And who does it affect the most? Impoverished areas in which comprise more Black people than white people. And what's worse is that all of this is endorsed and spread by the Democratic Party.
Black Lives Matter, period. I'm not afraid to say it.
The most vivid reminder, the criminal justice system in this country has never operated in a colorblind fashion.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
And even though data to refute all of this and actually put it into question is easily attainable, I was able to find all of this myself, not a statistician, not a historian, they will still endorse this. They're adding to the culture of fear, disparity, and hate. But why? Well, the Democratic Party is always supposed to be fighting for civil rights, equality, lifting up minorities. So it is of interest to them to do this, to win votes. When you think about 13% of the population are Black, well, if we can get most Black people to vote for us because Republicans don't care about minorities, but we do, then that's going to be a massive incentive. And actually, a lot of left policy in Western society relies on the prevailing narrative that we have huge problems and inequalities for minorities, huge problems of homophobia, huge problems of transphobia. In reality, it's never as big as it seems, but also not as provable as it seems. So again, if you're going through the world thinking, well, the left party are the noble ones, they care about everyone, and then the right-wing party are evil, they only care about themselves, it can work both ways. Even though there may be individuals who might be racist, individuals who might be homophobic, of which there always will be, wallowing in that and believing that life is always going to be harder for you is not going to get you anywhere. With the Black Lives Matter Network Foundation, they raised over 90 million in 2020, but we have 60 million that they've refused to account for, and there's very obvious proof of their embezzlement.
New released tax filings show exactly how Black Lives Matter spent their donation money.
BLM gave almost $1 million to Damon Turner, the father of the co-founder's child. $840,000 went to her brother, Paul.
Patrice Cullors, one of the Black Lives Matter co-founders, admits to throwing two parties at the organization's $6 million Los Angeles mansion. Cullors
in his book, BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution, Mike Gonzalez attempts to expose the sort of ideologies underpinning the leaders behind this movement. So we have 3 African-American women who've long been tied to Marxist ideology. They're self-proclaimed Marxists. They believe in a future where natural rights of speech and property are curtailed or eliminated completely. They're committed to driving a communist state, and they use Black Lives Matter to drive this agenda. An example is Alicia Garza. She said, "We have to dismantle the organizing principles of society. Capitalism is racist and Black lives cannot matter under capitalism." And this is a falsehood because capitalism is colorblind. Capitalism does not automatically favor one race over another. And Black Lives Matter is relying on police protests to become hostile so that police have to intervene and overreact. And then this just perpetuates the fact that they need to keep going. There's an issue with the police. To use the Black Lives Matter movement, which is supposed to be about police brutality and equality of Black people, and saying now you have to be anti-capitalist to get on board with it, that is questionable. And you can see how by drawing people in to fight for a noble cause, and then step by step convincing them, if you want to fight for this, then this is what you need to do. We are radicalizing people. This foundation has BLM for Schools, which goes around to over 14,000 school districts, educating them on this stuff. Most of it, again, steeped in critical race theory. And they have 13 guiding principles on their website. So they refer to many things that have nothing to do with Black lives, such as globalism, queer affirming, trans affirming, and it's obvious that this has become way more. One thing in particular they talk about is this idea of abolishing the family. So one of their principles says, "We are committed to disrupting the Western's prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, and especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable." So dissect that. They are calling for the dismantling of the nuclear family. And as we learned earlier, one of the most important things for low-income Black people from impoverished areas to have a chance for success is to have
a nuclear family,
2 biological parents. And also what they're suggesting here is that children are no longer just the children of the parents, but children of the community. And this is all communistic ideas. And what's really led to a lot of people abandoning the cause is in their recent support of the Hamas attacks in Palestine. They posted in October, just a few days after it happened, this infographic that said, "I stand with Palestine," and they quoted, "That is all, that is it." It was actually a soldier in a paraglider, and the soldiers who used these paraglides on the October 7th attacks were also those responsible for the rape of women, decapitation of babies. You see where we're going with this. And since then, they have continued to post very polarizing, can be interpreted as anti-Semitic content on social media. Black Lives Matter is fighting for the oppressed versus the oppressor. And then, of course, they would adopt the same thing as Israel-Palestine, of which the prevailing narrative is Palestine is the oppressed and Israel is the oppressor. Simple. And we even see leaders of Black Lives Matter abandoning the cause themselves.
After a year on the inside, I learned they had little concern for rebuilding Black families.
Mark Lilla wrote a book in 2018 called The Once and Future Liberal. And in this, he criticizes Black Lives Matter as part of his broader left-wing critique of identity politics. So though he agreed with the overall aims of the movement, he called their rhetoric a textbook example of how to not build solidarity. They're doing the opposite of what the civil rights movement did, which was to consciously appeal to what we actually share, whereas now it's all about emphasizing the difference between race and other cultures. The more we emphasize the differences, the more we separate. So do I support Black Lives Matter? Well, no. We've seen how the principles underpinning the cause cannot be proven. The damage the movement has caused, particularly towards the communities it deems to fight for, and how the movement is being repurposed to spread all of the kinds of damaging ideologies. So what's the solution? Well, I can't claim to know that. Obviously, I'm not a politician in America. However, it seems to me that leftism culture as a whole, not only Black Lives Matter, is a huge problem. We are encouraging apathy, victimhood, helplessness, no responsibility or empowerment. And this is distracting us all from the real issues which politicians are able to spread under the radar. You know, all of this identity politics is such a waste of time.
Except for my YouTube channel.
We are putting so much energy into all of this. We need to encourage nuclear families. We need to encourage parents to stay together and educate people from lower income areas on how important this is. Should we reverse the welfare state, or at the very least, have a system in which we grant minorities this sort of benefit, but only on the caveat that they reach certain goals? They need to put in a degree of hard work in order to obtain these things and not just simply get it for free. If BLM continues as a movement, they should not be focusing on the police. They should be focusing on Black crime rates, education, the concept of working hard, addressing cultural issues within the community, getting rid of this whole Marxist ideology, which has nothing to do with Black lives. And we can use stuff like this and movements like this to encourage people to think more critically. If you ever respond to someone's argument by saying, everyone knows that, so Black people are far more likely to be arrested, everyone knows that, that should be where you are questioning yourself the most. Most people thought the earth was flat. Why would you question it? Think back to a time when most people thought being gay was sinful. Why would you question it? Because if you are just adopting opinions, just because most people think a certain thing does not mean that it's right. So do your research, consider both sides to situations like Israel-Palestine, trans rights, environmentalism, immigration, sex education. We should always, always be questioning ourselves. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it. It took me a while to get this out because I actually had so much research to do. Please check out my podcast, the Jack Jewell podcast, where I talk about current affairs, lots of LGBT issues. And with that said, I will see you all in the next video.